My name is Alicia Turner. At my mom's family party in a packed Chicago community hall, she pointed at me and sneered, "What is that useless doing here?" The room erupted in laughter. Cousins, aunts, everyone treating me like a joke. She hugged her stepdaughter tight and crowed, "This is my true heir." But when I stepped back inside, her daughter froze eyes wide and choked out, "Hello, Chairman." And just like that, the room flipped. Before I get to my story, I want to know what time it is and what city you're listening in. I'm glad to know how far my story has spread. Out in the parking lot, I leaned against my car. My mom's words stung sharp as a slap. I'd built Innovate Solutions from a startup desk to a Silicon Valley giant, sat through boardroom fights and buried colleagues after failed deals. Yet here, among family, she'd branded me useless. I took a deep breath, the air thick with exhaust from nearby factories. My hands shook not from anger but from the weight of being erased. I'd learned to stay steady years ago back in Detroit, where life taught me to keep my head down and push forward. We lived in a cramped apartment off a street that smelled of oil and steel right by the auto plants. I was 13, maybe 14, when Dad James Turner sat me down at our chipped kitchen table. He worked double shifts at a parts warehouse, hands rough from lugging crates. Mom was barely around, always chasing some new scheme or man, leaving us to scrape by. Alicia, Dad said, voice low but firm, "You don't have to win every fight, but the ones you pick, fight them clean." He died a year later, heart attack gone before I could graduate high school. I folded papers at dawn, bagged groceries after school, saved every dime for a shot out of that city. Mom never cared. She'd breeze in perfume, heavy, tossing insults like spare change. "You're just like your dad, going nowhere," she'd say. I took it as fuel. By 18, I boarded a bus to Chicago with $50 and a notebook of plans. That's where Innovatech started, in a basement office with a flickering bulb. I snapped back to the present, the hall's music drifting out. My car's trunk held a box of old keepsakes, Dad's things I couldn't toss. I popped it open, digging for something to ground me. My fingers brushed a worn envelope, his handwriting faded but clear. "To Alicia, my fighter." Inside was a letter, short and plain, telling me I was enough. Tucked with it, a yellowed document caught my eye, a draft of Mom's will scribbled in her sharp hand. It listed assets, property from Dad's old savings, all marked for Crystal Powell, her stepdaughter. My name was nowhere. My stomach twisted. Mom wasn't just mocking me, she was rewriting our family to cut me out. Crystal, the one she called her true heir, was getting everything, Dad's legacy, the little he'd left behind. I'd known about Crystal's role at Innovatech, a project manager in our Chicago branch. Her name had crossed my desk last week, flagged for padded expense reports. Nothing final, but enough to warrant a hard look. I stood there, letter in hand, the night closing in. Mom's voice echoed in my head, not just from tonight, but from years of dismissal. I wasn't the kid in Detroit anymore, scraping for bus fare. I was the woman who'd built an empire, who'd signed deals that kept thousands employed. And yet, she thought she could bury me with a word. I gripped the letter tight. This wasn't over. I stayed in the shadows, my pulse still racing from the letter I'd found, Mom's plan to hand Dad's legacy to Crystal Powell. Her dismissal lingered, a bruise I couldn't shake. I spotted Crystal across the room, her blonde curls bouncing as she held court with a cluster of cousins. She was 28, all confidence, her red dress flashing under the fluorescent lights. My latest project at Innovatech, she boasted loud enough for me to catch. "Huge deal, biggest contract this quarter. I've got it locked down." Her laugh was sharp, and the cousins nodded, impressed, passing her another drink. My jaw tightened. Crystal's name had landed on my desk last week, tied to a report about padded expense claims, fake hotel receipts, inflated travel costs. Nothing proven yet, but the numbers didn't add up. She didn't know I was the one reviewing her file, the chairman she'd never met. I edged closer, keeping my face blank, blending into the chatter of aunts and uncles swapping old stories. Then Aunt Lori Bennett slipped beside me, her gray hair tucked in a neat bun, her voice a low whisper. Alicia, I heard something you need to know. She glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Your mom, Denise Clark. She's been meeting with a lawyer. She's rewriting her will, leaving everything to Crystal. The house your dad's savings, all of it. You're out. My breath caught. The letter in my car wasn't a mistake, it was real. Mom wasn't just mocking me. She was erasing me from our family's future. Aunt Lori's eyes softened, her hand brushing my arm. I tried to talk her out of it, but she says Crystal's the one who deserves it. I knotted my throat tight and kept my gaze on Crystal. She was still talking, oblivious, tossing out details about her big deal. The client loves me, she said, smirking. I worked the numbers just right. I knew those numbers. Her report had claimed thousands in expenses for a trip that never happened. My hands curled into fists, but I stayed still, years of boardroom discipline holding me steady. The cousins around Crystal laughed, one clapping her shoulder. You're going places, girl, he said. Another chimed in. Denise must be proud. I caught their glances my way, quick and pitying, like I was the outsider who didn't belong. Mom had set the stage and they were playing along. I wanted to step forward, call Crystal out right there, but that wasn't the plan. Dad's words, fight clean, echoed from years ago, and I wasn't about to lose my edge. Not yet. Aunt Lori squeezed my hand, her voice barely audible. You're stronger than this, Alicia. Don't let her win. I met her eyes, gave a small nod, but I'd heard enough. Mom's will, Crystal's lies, they were building a house of cards, and I wasn't going to let it stand. I slipped closer to the crowd. The sting of Mom's words didn't fade, but I kept my face steady, scanning the room. Cousins whispered, their eyes sliding past me like I was a stranger at my own family's party. They'd bought her story. Denise Clark had painted me as nothing, while her stepdaughter, Crystal Powell, was the shining heir. I caught sight of Crystal weaving through the crowd, her red dress catching the light, a plastic cup of beer in hand. She was still riding the high of Mom's praise, oblivious to the truth I'd just learned about the will. I thought about the company I'd built, Innovate Solutions, pulled through the 2008 crash when startups were folding left and right. I'd signed deals under pressure that would have broken most, sat up nights balancing books to keep thousands employed. That was my legacy, not some scrap of paper Mom thought she could rewrite. A group of aunts near the buffet nudged each other, their laughter sharp-aimed my way. She's just here for the free food, one muttered loud enough to carry. Another nodded, smirking. Denise says she's nobody special. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. Years of facing down boardroom skeptics had taught me to stand tall when the room turned cold. Then Crystal spotted me. She sauntered over, her smile too wide, like she was doing me a favor. Hey, you're Alicia. Right, she said, her voice dripping with fake warmth. She didn't know who I was, not really. You must love these family things. I'm kind of a big deal at Innovate, you know. Just closed a huge contract, handled the numbers like a pro. Her words hung there, bold and careless. I knew that contract. It was the one with the padded expenses, fake receipts for client dinners that never happened. Numbers she'd handled to skim thousands. My eyes narrowed, but I kept my tone even. Sounds impressive, I said, letting her dig deeper. Oh, it is, Crystal went on, tossing her hair. The client's eating out of my hand. I know how to work a deal, make things look just right. She winked like we were sharing a secret. The irony hit hard. She was bragging about fraud to the chairman who'd seen her report. I almost laughed, but I held it in, my mind racing. She had no idea the ground was crumbling under her. A cousin nearby overheard, raising his cup. That's our girl, he said, grinning. Crystal's got the family name covered. The others nodded their approval, loud, their glances at me laced with pity. They didn't know the half of it. Crystal's smugness. Mom's lies, it was all a house of cards, and I was starting to see how to bring it down. I thought of Dad, his voice steady in my memory, telling me to fight clean. I wasn't going to shout, or make a scene not yet. But Crystal's words, her careless slip about the deal, had just handed me a match. This wasn't just about Mom's will anymore. It was about truth. I turned away, my resolve hardening. I pulled out my phone, my hands steady despite the fire in my chest. Crystal Powell's smug words, her boast about fudging numbers mixed with Mom's sneer, and the cousin's laughter, a chorus that tried to drown me. But I wasn't the kid who folded under pressure anymore. I'd built Innovate Solutions through market crashes and hostile takeovers. This wasn't a boardroom, but the stakes felt just as high. I scrolled to Gloria Simmons, my old mentor from the early days at Innovatech. She was 60 sharp as ever, a woman who'd clawed her way to VP before retiring. I hit call. She answered on the first ring, her voice gravelly but warm. "Alicia, it's late. You okay? Mom just called me useless in front of everyone." I said, my voice low. "Her stepdaughter Crystal thinks she's untouchable, bragging about deals I know are dirty. And Mom's rewriting Dad's legacy to give her everything." Gloria didn't hesitate. "Sounds like my old boss in '98. He called me a nobody in a board meeting, thought I'd never fight back. I filed a lawsuit, small, clean, just enough to make him sweat. Cost him his bonus and his pride." "You don't have to scream, Alicia. Stand firm, show the truth. If Crystal's playing dirty, you've got the receipts." Her words landed like a lifeline. I thought of Dad James Turner, his voice steady, in that Detroit kitchen telling me to fight clean. Mom Denise Clark had spent years dismissing me, and now Crystal was following her lead, thinking she could skate by with padded expenses. But I'd seen the reports. I had the power to set things right. "I don't want to humiliate them," I said, pacing the asphalt. "But I can't let this slide." "Then don't," Gloria replied. "You're the chairman. You earned that chair. Walk in there and let them see who you are. No shouting, no games, just the truth. If Crystal's crossed a line, handle it by the book. Lawsuits aren't revenge, they're accountability." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Thanks, Gloria." The call ended and I stood still, the night air cool against my skin. The party's music thumped faintly, a reminder of the crowd waiting inside. I thought of the company I'd built, the sleepless nights balancing budgets to save jobs, the deals I'd closed when no one believed I could. Mom's will, Crystal's lies, they didn't define me. My work did. I opened my car's trunk where my work bag sat untouched from a board meeting that morning. Inside was the suit I'd worn, black tailored with the Innovatech pin on the lapel, a small silver emblem of everything I'd earned. I slipped off my casual jacket, pulled on the blazer, and straightened the pin. My fingers brushed the crisp shirt, smoothing it flat. I adjusted my tie, the knot tight and precise, each movement grounding me. The suit wasn't just fabric. It was armor-proof of every step I'd taken from that Detroit apartment to the top. I glanced at my reflection in the car window. The woman staring back wasn't the girl Mom had written off. She was Alicia Turner, chairman, who'd fought battles bigger than a family party. Gloria's words echoed, "Stand firm. Dad's to fight clean." I didn't need to raise my voice or throw punches. The truth was enough, and I was ready to let it speak. Crystal's careless bragging, Mom's attempt to erase me, they'd built their own trap. I closed the trunk, my steps firm against the pavement. The hall loomed ahead, its lights bright, the crowd unaware of what was coming. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to stand in what I'd built, what no one could take away. I stepped toward the hall. The hall's doors swung open as I stepped inside, my suit, sharp, the Innovatech pin on my lapel, gleaming under the Chicago Community Center's lights. The crowd's chatter hit me like a wave, plates clinking, kids laughing, the pop music thumping from the DJ's speakers. I kept my head high, my steps even, ignoring the glances from cousins who'd laughed at Mom's sneer earlier. Her words, useless, echoed faintly, but I pushed them down. I wasn't here to beg for their approval. I was here to stand in what I'd built. I moved toward the center, eyes scanning the room. Mom Denise Clark stood near the buffet, her arm around Crystal Powell, her stepdaughter still basking in the glow of being called the true heir. Crystal's red dress flashed as she chatted with an uncle, her plastic cup of beer tilted in her hand. She hadn't seen me yet, didn't know the woman in the suit was the chairman she'd been dodging in her expense reports. I stopped near a table, letting the crowd part around me. A cousin whispered, "Who's that?" Another nudged him, "Alicia. I think Denise's kid." Their voices dropped, unsure as my presence registered. I didn't speak, didn't need to. The suit, the pin, the way I carried myself, it was enough to make heads turn. Then Crystal looked up. Her eyes locked on mine and her smile froze. The cup in her hand trembled, beer sloshing over the rim, staining her dress. "Hello, Chairman." She choked out, her voice cracking loud enough to cut through the music. The room went dead silent. The DJ fumbled the track, skipping then stopping. Every eye swung to me, then to her. Crystal's face drained white, her hand shaking so hard the cup slipped, splashing beer across her skirt. She stumbled back, the wet patch spreading, her confidence crumbling. "Oh my God," she stammered. I didn't know." Her uncle stepped away, his grin gone. Aunts who'd laughed earlier froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. Whispers started low and urgent. "Chairman of Innovate," one cousin muttered. "That's Alicia," another hissed. "Crystal works for her." The air shifted heavy with realization. They'd heard Crystal's bragging her big deal, her handled numbers, and now they saw me, the woman who'd seen her padded receipts, the fake expenses she thought she'd hidden. I stood still, my gaze steady on Crystal. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't smirk. "We'll handle business at the office," I said, my tone calm but cold. "Bring your reports, Crystal. All of them." Her lips parted, but no words came. She nodded, jerky and quick, her eyes darting to Mom. Denise's arm dropped from Crystal's shoulder, her face stiff, lips pressed tight. She tried to laugh it off, a weak chuckle, but it died in the silence. Aunt Lori Bennett, standing nearby, started clapping, slow and deliberate. "Alicia," she called, her voice thick with pride. Others joined, hesitant at first, then louder. An uncle I barely knew nodded, his eyes wide. "Didn't know you ran the show," he said. The whispers grew about Crystal's deals, the expenses she'd fudged, the reports I'd seen. "She's in trouble," someone murmured. "Big trouble." The crowd's mood flipped, their pity for me turning to shock at Crystal's fall. Mom's eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet, her hands twisting her napkin. I didn't linger. I'd made my point. The truth was out, raw and undeniable, without a single shout. Crystal's spilled beer, her trembling hands, the room's stunned silence. It was louder than any speech I could have given. I turned, my suit crisp against the chaos, and headed for the exit. The crowd parted, their murmurs following me, some clapping, some just staring. Mom didn't move. Neither did Crystal. They stood frozen, caught in the mess they'd made. I didn't look back. I'd come to this party for Aunt Lori, for the family I thought might see me. They saw me now, not as Denise's useless kid, but as Alicia Turner, chairman, the one who held the cards. I walked out, the whispers fading. The weight of Mom's sneer and Crystal's spilled beer didn't follow me out here. I'd stood in my truth. Let the room see who I was, Alicia Turner, chairman of Innovate Solutions, not the nobody Denise Clark tried to paint me as. I didn't need their applause or their pity. I needed to move forward. I slid into my car, the leather cool against my suit, and pulled out my phone. Mom's number flashed up, Denise Clark, a name I'd once tied to family, now just a contact. I blocked it. My thumb steady, no hesitation. Crystal Powell's number came next. Her smug voice from the party, her fake receipts on my desk. Blocked. No texts, no calls, no second chances. I'd spent years giving Mom the benefit of the doubt, hoping she'd see me. She never did. Crystal followed her lead, thinking she could skate by with lies. I was done. Back at Innovate's Chicago office the next week, I sat at my desk, the city skyline sharp through the window. Crystal's expense report was in front of me, flagged for thousands in fake charges, hotel stays that didn't happen, client dinners she'd invented. I'd seen it coming, heard her brag about handling numbers at the party. HR moved fast. They called her in, laid out the evidence, and gave her 2 days to explain. She couldn't. The termination letter was signed by noon, my pen steady, no emotion. It wasn't personal, it was the job. Innovatech didn't run on favoritism. It ran on accountability. Crystal didn't take it quietly. A month later, she filed a wrongful termination claim, dragging my name into it, saying I'd targeted her for family reasons. The lawyer's email landed in my inbox full of bluster, but I wasn't worried. The evidence, her padded receipts, email trails, audit logs, was ironclad. The case went to a labor board hearing, quick and clean, like Gloria had taught me. Crystal lost. The judge didn't blink, citing clear documentation. In America, the law doesn't bend for excuses when the numbers don't lie. Her resume took the hit, background checks would flag the fraud, making her next job hunt a slog. Mom's fallout was quieter but sharper. The family's Facebook group, where aunts and cousins posted potluck plans and birthday pics, turned on her. Aunt Lori Bennett started it, sharing a post about the party, about me running Innovatech. Alicia's the real deal, she wrote. The comments piled up, uncles praising my work, cousins asking why Denise had lied. Someone tagged Mom, asking why she'd called me useless. She tried to reply a long ramble about misunderstandings, but it flopped. Relatives stopped inviting her to dinners, unfollowed her posts. In a Midwestern family like ours, where group chats and Sunday BBQs tie everyone together, that silence was louder than any fight. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it or call Aunt Lori to stir the pot. I went back to work, board meetings, late nights, new contracts. The company was my anchor, the place I'd built when family wasn't enough. I thought of Dad James Turner, his words about fighting clean. He'd be proud, not because I'd won, but because I'd stood firm without sinking to Mom's level. Crystal's lies. Mom's will, they'd tried to erase me, but I'd written my own story long ago. Months passed, the city's rhythm steady around me. I drove out to a quiet park one weekend, the grass clipped neat, the air carrying a hint of lake breeze. I stood alone, thinking of the girl in Detroit who'd saved for a bus ticket, who'd fought her way to the top. Mom's words. Crystal's schemes. They were noise, not truth. My worth wasn't in their approval or their legacy. It was in the work I'd done, the lives I'd touched, the company I'd built from nothing. If you're carrying words that cut you down from family or anyone else, let them go. Cut the ties that hurt, not to destroy, but to free yourself. Your value isn't in what they say, it's in what you do day after day, clean and steady. Stand in that, and no one can take it away. I drove on, the city fading behind me.
She doesn't understand the first thing about precision engineering. My father-in-law's voice carried through the partially open door of the executive boardroom. This is Montgomery Precision, not some arts and crafts project. I froze outside, the quarterly reports clutched to my chest, my knuckles white against the manila folder. I should have been used to William Montgomery's dismissals by now. After all, I'd endured 5 years of them since marrying his son David and joining the family business. My name is Olivia Reyes Montgomery, and at 34, I'd spent the last 5 years helping transform Montgomery Precision from a regional manufacturing company into one of the most innovative aerospace component suppliers in the industry. Not that William ever acknowledged my contributions. To him, I was the outsider who'd married his only son, the graphic designer who had no place in his world of machine tolerances and metal alloys. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The conversation in the room halted abruptly. William sat at the head of the conference table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored suit a shield of authority. David sat beside him, glancing up with a mixture of guilt and discomfort in his eyes. The other board members, mostly William's golfing buddies, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Olivia," William said, forcing a thin smile. "We're in the middle of a private discussion." "About me, it seems," I replied, keeping my voice steady as I approached the table. Since I'm the topic of conversation, I thought I might as well join in. William's jaw tightened. This is a board matter. Your quarterly design report can wait. My quarterly operations report, I corrected. As Chief Operations Officer, I'm here to discuss our production efficiency improvements and the success of the new aerospace division, which has increased company revenue by 22% this quarter alone. I placed the folder on the table and met William's gaze directly. 5 years at Montgomery Precision had taught me that showing weakness around William Montgomery was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. We'll review it later, William said dismissively. The board is currently discussing leadership restructuring. You mean my removal, I stated flatly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. David cleared his throat but said nothing, his typical response whenever his father and I clashed. Always the peacekeeper, never the defender. William leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. Montgomery Precision has been a family business for 3 generations. The Montgomery name stands for excellence in engineering. Real engineering, not the cosmetic changes you've been implementing. Cosmetic? I couldn't help but laugh. The integrated quality control system I developed has reduced defects by 63%. The workflow restructuring saved us nearly $2 million in the first year alone. And the aerospace division you opposed so strongly, it now accounts for almost a third of our total revenue. Numbers on paper, William waved his hand dismissively. This company was built on relationships and reputation, not flashy presentations and risky ventures. The aerospace contract with Northstar wasn't risky. It was the opportunity we needed to move beyond regional manufacturing. The world is changing, William. Montgomery Precision needed to change with it. That's enough. William's voice hardened. This meeting is for board members only. As you're so fond of reminding us with your operations reports, you should be attending to the day-to-day running of the company, not interrupting board discussions. I glanced at David, waiting for him to speak up, to acknowledge that the leadership restructuring directly concerned his wife. But he just sat there, his eyes fixed on the table. Fine, I said, gathering my reports. When you're ready to discuss actual company performance rather than family politics, you know where to find me. As I walked out, I heard William continuing as if I'd never interrupted. As I was saying, gentlemen, Montgomery Precision needs a return to traditional leadership. The door closed behind me, but his words had already planted a seed, one that had been germinating for months now. It was time to make a change. 3 hours later, I sat in my office, staring at the email I drafted to Alan Chen, CEO of Vertex Innovations, one of the most forward-thinking aerospace manufacturing firms in the country. We'd met at an industry conference 6 months ago, and he'd been consistently impressed with the innovations I'd implemented at Montgomery. So impressed, in fact, that he'd mentioned bringing me on as Vertex's new COO if I ever tired of family businesses. At the time, I'd laughed it off. Despite William's constant undermining, I believed in what I was building at Montgomery. I believed David would eventually step out of his father's shadow, and we would lead the company together into a new era. That belief had been growing increasingly fragile. I was still staring at the unsent email when David appeared in my doorway. His expression a familiar mix of apology and frustration. Liv, about the meeting. Don't, I cut him off. Just don't, David. We both know exactly what happened in there. What always happens. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Dad's from a different generation. He built this company with his hands. He just wants to protect its legacy. By pushing out the only person who's actually growing it, I shook my head. Your father isn't protecting anything. He's watching the industry evolve from the sidelines and refusing to join in. If Montgomery doesn't adapt, it dies. It's that simple. David ran a hand through his dark hair, a nervous habit he'd had since college when we'd first met. Back then, I found it endearing. Now it just reminded me of his inability to stand firm on anything. He's talking about bringing in Richard as interim COO, he finally admitted. Just temporarily, until things stabilize. Richard, William's nephew. The same Richard who had run his own father's manufacturing business into bankruptcy through sheer incompetence before William had rescued him with a meaningless VP title at Montgomery. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Of course he is. And what did you say when your father suggested replacing your wife with his failure of a nephew? David's silence was answer enough. Right, I said quietly. You said nothing. What do you want me to do, Liv? He's my father. This is his company. It's our company, I countered. Yours and mine. We've poured everything into Montgomery for 5 years. I've worked 80-hour weeks to modernize production, secure the aerospace contracts, implement systems that will keep this company relevant for another generation. And your father wants to erase all of that because he can't stand that the ideas came from me. David sighed, dropping into the chair across from my desk. Give it some time. The quarterly numbers are strong. Even Dad can't argue with success. Once the North Star project is complete and we can show the full return on investment, he'll come around. I study my husband, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time in our marriage. David was brilliant in his own way, a gifted engineer with an eye for design that had revolutionized our product aesthetics. But he would never stand up to his father. Not for the company, and not for me. I can't do this anymore, I said finally. What do you mean? This, I gestured around us. Being constantly undermined, having my expertise questioned, walking on eggshells in a company where I'm one of the principal architects of its current success. I'm done, David. His face paled. You're not thinking of leaving Montgomery? I didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. You can't, he said, leaning forward. We're in the middle of the North Star expansion. The aerospace division is your baby. No one else understands it like you do. Apparently Richard will figure it out, I replied, my voice laced with bitterness. Liv, please. If you leave now, it will only prove Dad right. And there it was, the real concern. Not that Montgomery would suffer without me, but that William's low opinion of me would be validated. I think we're done here, I said, turning back to my computer. You should get back to the board meeting before your father sends a search party. After David left, I stared at the email to Alan Chen for another long moment before finally pressing send. Not a commitment, just an inquiry about the opportunity he'd mentioned. An escape hatch if I needed it. Little did I know how quickly I would. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find my security clearance revoked for the Aerospace Development Wing. When I called the security desk, they informed me that Mr. Montgomery has implemented new access protocols. No mention of which Mr. Montgomery, but I knew it wasn't David. By lunchtime, rumors were swirling that Richard would be taking over aerospace operations temporarily while I focused on core manufacturing processes. My assistant, Maya, delivered this news with wide eyes and barely concealed outrage. Everyone knows he doesn't know the first thing about aerospace, she fumed. The North Star team is already panicking. I maintained my composure, thanked her for the information, and closed my office door. Then I opened my laptop and responded to Alan Chen's enthusiastic reply to my email from the previous night. Let's meet, tomorrow if possible. By the end of the day, William had made it official. Richard would be overseeing the aerospace division effective immediately. I was being reassigned to oversee the traditional manufacturing operations, essentially a demotion disguised as a lateral move. David called from the airport, conveniently scheduled to visit a client site just as his father made this power play. It's just temporary, he insisted. Dad's just trying to show who's in charge. Once I'm back, we'll sort this out. There's nothing to sort out, I replied, my decision solidifying with every word. Your father has made his position clear, and so have you, by your absence. That's not fair, Liv. This client meeting has been planned for weeks. Life rarely arranges itself conveniently, David. Sometimes you have to choose what matters most. You matter most, he said, but the words rang hollow. We'll fix this when I get back, I promise. I didn't bother responding to the empty promise. We both knew he wouldn't stand up to William, not in any way that mattered. The next morning, I met Alan Chen for breakfast at a quiet restaurant 20 miles from Montgomery Precision. No need to fuel the rumor mill any further. I've been hoping you'd call, Alan said after we'd ordered. What finally changed your mind? I gave him the condensed version of recent events. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly incredulous. So they're sidelining the architect of their most profitable division because of family politics. He shook his head. Their loss, potentially our gain. I meant what I said at the conference. Vertex needs someone with your vision. I haven't made any decisions yet, I cautioned. I've invested 5 years in Montgomery. That's not easy to walk away from. Alan nodded thoughtfully. I understand. But let me be clear about what Vertex is offering. Complete autonomy over operations, a seat on the board from day one, and equity in the company. We value innovation and results, not family trees. It was everything Montgomery had never given me despite my contributions. Still, I hesitated. I need time to think. And to be honest, I need to understand what walking away would mean for the aerospace division I built at Montgomery. I won't leave my team hanging. I respect that, Alan said, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't stay open indefinitely. Back at Montgomery, I found Richard sitting in my office, feet propped on my desk, talking loudly on his phone about shaking things up in aerospace. He barely acknowledged me as I entered, finishing his call before lazily removing his feet from my desk. Olivia, he greeted me with false cheer. Just getting acquainted with the aerospace operations. Quite a mess you've made of the documentation. Very confusing systems you've implemented. I smiled tightly. The systems that secured Montgomery's largest contract in its history and increased company valuation by 40%. Those confusing systems. Well, he shrugged, standing to leave. Sometimes the simplest approaches are best. William and I were discussing a return to basics, fewer bells and whistles, more solid engineering. The Montgomery way. As he sauntered out, I made my decision. I spent the rest of the day downloading copies of all my work, the project plans I'd developed, the quality control systems I'd designed, the client relationships I'd nurtured. All of it legally mine as the creator. All of it about to walk out the door with me. That evening, I drafted 2 letters, my resignation from Montgomery Precision, effective immediately, and my acceptance of Alan Chen's offer at Vertex Innovations. David called again that night, sounding tired after a day of client meetings. "How are things going with Richard?" he asked cautiously. "About as well as you'd expect," I replied. "He's planning to dismantle everything I've built in aerospace. Your father's thrilled, I'm sure." "Dad just needs time to see that your ways work," David sighed. "We knew it wouldn't be easy changing a company with so much history." "No, David. I knew it wouldn't be easy. You thought your father would eventually recognize my value. He hasn't, and he won't. And you've never been willing to force the issue." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. "What are you saying, Liv?" "I'm saying I've accepted a position at Vertex Innovations. I start next week." The shock in his voice was almost comical. "You're leaving? Just like that? What about us?" "That's up to you, David. I'm taking control of my career, something I should have done years ago instead of trying to earn your father's approval. You need to decide what matters more to you, your father's version of Montgomery or our marriage." "That's not fair. You can't ask me to choose between my family and—" "I'm your family too, David. At least I thought I was." The next morning, I arrived early to clear out my office, expecting to have the floor to myself. Instead, I found William Montgomery waiting for me, sitting in my chair as if he owned it, which technically he did. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said, his voice cold. "Vertex Innovations. Very impressive." News traveled fast in our industry. I wasn't surprised he'd already heard. "Thank you," I replied, placing my box on the desk and beginning to gather my personal items. "I assume my resignation letter reached you as well." It did. Quite abrupt, don't you think? No notice period, no transition plan for your responsibilities. Not very professional. I met his gaze calmly. About as professional as being locked out of my own division and replaced by your nephew without consultation. I believe we're even on professional courtesy. William's jaw tightened. "You signed non-compete and confidentiality agreements when you joined Montgomery. I trust you remember the terms." "Perfectly," I nodded. "No working for direct competitors within a 100-mile radius for 1 year after termination. Vertex's headquarters is in Phoenix, well outside that radius. As for confidentiality, I have no intention of sharing Montgomery's proprietary information. My value to Vertex lies in my skills and vision, not in trade secrets." "You think you're very clever," William said, standing slowly. "But you've made a critical mistake. David will never choose you over his birthright. Montgomery is in his blood." For the first time in our confrontational history, I felt a wave of pity for William Montgomery. He truly believed his company was the center of everyone's universe, that no one could possibly succeed without the Montgomery name behind them. "Maybe you're right," I conceded. "But I've made my choice, and now David will make his. Either way, I'll be fine." William scoffed. We'll see how fine you are when Vertex realizes you were just riding on Montgomery's reputation. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in this industry without a legacy behind you. I finished packing my box and picked it up, looking around the office one last time. That's where you're wrong, William. I've never had a legacy to fall back on. Everything I've achieved has been through my own merit, including transforming your stagnating company into a modern competitor. The question isn't whether I can succeed without Montgomery. It's whether Montgomery can succeed without me. I walked out with my head high, sensing William's glare boring into my back. 5 years of frustration and undervaluation were finally behind me. Whatever came next, whether David chose to support me or not, I was free. 6 months later, I stood in my corner office at Vertex Innovations, reviewing the final plans for our new aerospace navigation system. Under my leadership, Vertex had secured 3 major contracts that Montgomery had been pursuing, and our stock had risen 18%. My assistant knocked on the open door. "The Montgomery representative is here for your meeting." I took a deep breath. "Send them in." The door opened to reveal not the Montgomery sales team I'd expected, but David. He looked different, more confident somehow, his posture straight and decisive in a way I'd rarely seen when his father was in the picture. "David," I said, surprised. "I was expecting your aerospace sales director." "We restructured the department," he replied. "I'm handling key accounts personally now." I gestured for him to sit, maintaining a professional distance despite the personal undercurrents. We'd spoken sparingly over the past 6 months, our marriage suspended in a strange limbo while David figured things out. I'd given him space, focusing on building my new life at Vertex. "Montgomery wants to propose a partnership on the Stellar project," David continued, pulling out a folder. "We have manufacturing capabilities that would complement Vertex's design expertise." I raised an eyebrow. "A partnership? That's unexpected. What does your father think of this proposal?" David met my gaze steadily. "My father no longer makes these decisions. He retired 3 months ago." Retired? I couldn't hide my shock. William Montgomery had always sworn he'd die at his desk rather than retire. "After you left, everything you predicted happened. Richard nearly destroyed the aerospace division within weeks. The North Star contract was in jeopardy. Our stock dropped 20%. David's expression hardened. I had to make a choice. "What did you do?" "I called an emergency board meeting and presented the consequences of my father's decisions. I showed them the true numbers, how your leadership had saved Montgomery from irrelevance, and how quickly we were falling without you. I gave them an ultimatum. Either my father and Richard stepped down from operational control, or I would leave and start my own company." I stared at him, barely recognizing this decisive man as the same person who had spent years avoiding conflict with his father. "The board sided with me," David continued. "Dad agreed to retire to a ceremonial chairman emeritus role. Richard was reassigned to a position more suited to his skills." "Meaning?" A small smile crossed David's face. "He manages our booth at trade shows." Despite everything, I laughed. "And now you're here proposing a partnership with the company that hired me away." "I'm here because Montgomery needs Vertex's innovation, and Vertex could benefit from Montgomery's manufacturing infrastructure." He paused. "And because I finally made the choice I should have made years ago. I chose you, Liv. I'm just hoping it's not too late." I considered him thoughtfully. The past 6 months had been transformative for me. At Vertex, I'd found the respect and recognition that had eluded me at Montgomery. I built a new life, one where my value wasn't constantly questioned. "The partnership proposal has merit," I said finally. "I'll review it with our team." "And the other part?" David asked quietly. "That's more complicated," I admitted. "I'm not the same person who left Montgomery. I'm not looking to be rescued or brought back into the fold." "I'm not trying to rescue you," David said earnestly. "I'm trying to earn back your respect. The partnership proposal isn't about bringing you back. It's about showing you that I've changed. That Montgomery has changed." I nodded slowly. "I'll need time. Both for the proposal and everything else." "I understand." He stood to leave. "For what it's worth, you were right about everything. Montgomery wouldn't have survived without your innovations. My father was too proud to admit it, but I'm not. You literally saved our company, then we pushed you out. I'll never make that mistake again." After he left, I stood at my window overlooking the Phoenix skyline, thinking about legacy and value and the unexpected turns life takes. 6 months ago, I had been forced out of a company I helped transform. Now that same company wanted to partner with me, recognizing the worth they had previously dismissed. William Montgomery had been right about one thing. Montgomery was in David's blood. What he hadn't understood was that innovation and progress were in mine. Together, perhaps we could build something stronger than either legacy alone. But whatever happened with David, with Montgomery, with the potential partnership, I knew one truth with absolute certainty. I would never again allow anyone to make me feel small for being exactly who I was. An outsider who saw possibilities others missed, who built success through vision rather than inheritance. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. The persistent rain outside matched my mood as I stared at the quarterly projections on my screen. Something was wrong. Revenues down 27%, 3 major clients unexpectedly canceling contracts, manufacturing delays that made no logical sense. I ran the numbers again, scrutinizing each line item. This wasn't random market fluctuation. This was deliberate. My name is Alana Farrow, and at 34, I was watching my cousin methodically dismantle the architectural innovation firm my grandfather had built from the ground up. Alana, the executive committee meeting starts in 15 minutes, my assistant Marcus said, knocking lightly on my open door. His usually calm demeanor was strained. Jason has invited the board members. Of course he had. Jason had been orchestrating this for months, positioning himself as the voice of reason while I supposedly drove Farrow design and engineering into the ground. Thanks, Marcus. Is everything set up in the conference room? Yes, but he hesitated, lowering his voice. There are shareholders I've never seen before, and the legal team wasn't informed of this meeting until an hour ago. I nodded, hiding my surprise. That's fine. Could you make sure my presentation is loaded on the main system? After he left, I unlocked my desk drawer and removed a slim external hard drive. 6 months of evidence that I'd been meticulously collecting piece by piece. Tonight would determine whether my grandfather's legacy survived or if it would be carved up and sold off to the highest bidder. Farrow Design and Engineering was no ordinary architectural firm. My grandfather, Thomas Farrow, had revolutionized sustainable construction technology in the 1980s, when most firms were still focused on aesthetics alone. His patented systems for energy efficiency and waste reduction had transformed the industry. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left me in charge, not my Uncle Richard or his son Jason, both of whom had expected to inherit control. The firm needs innovation, not tradition, grandfather had written in his will. Elena understands that the future must be built, not inherited. Uncle Richard had resigned from the board within weeks, but Jason had stayed, smiling, congratulating me, and immediately beginning his campaign of sabotage. I slipped the hard drive into my pocket and picked up my tablet, scrolling through the secure message from our Tokyo office that had arrived yesterday. Documentation complete. All records secured. Supporting you all the way. A final text arrived from my brother Lucas. In position. Ready when you are. I straightened my suit jacket and headed for the conference room. Time to end this. The room fell silent as I entered. Jason sat at the head of the table, my grandfather's former place and now rightfully mine, looking immaculate in a custom suit, exuding concerned professionalism. Board members lined both sides of the table, along with several unfamiliar faces that I assumed were the shareholders Marcus had mentioned. Ah, Elena, thank you for joining us, Jason said, his voice perfectly calibrated to convey both authority and regret. I know this must be difficult. Not at all, I replied, taking the only open seat, purposely positioned at the far end of the table. Though I am curious about why this meeting was called without proper notification to all executive officers. The situation required immediate action, Jason responded smoothly. Farrow Design is in crisis, and every day we delay addressing it puts the company at greater risk. He gestured to the screen behind him, where grim financial projections load in accusatory red. As you can all see, he continued, under the current leadership, Farrow has experienced unprecedented decline. Our stock has fallen 32% in 9 months. We've lost major clients, including the Singapore Green Tower project and the Toronto waterfront development. Our reputation, built over 3 generations, is eroding rapidly. Murmurs spread around the table. I noticed Jason's father, my Uncle Richard, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, not at the table but positioned like a spectator at a show he'd already seen in rehearsal. "I've prepared a detailed analysis," Jason continued, clicking through slides of declining metrics, each one carefully selected to paint the bleakest possible picture. "The evidence is clear. We need an immediate change in leadership to save Faro Design." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in before delivering his final blow. "Therefore, I move that we vote to remove Elena Faro as CEO, effective immediately, and install an emergency management committee to stabilize the company while we evaluate strategic options." Strategic options, the polite corporate term for selling off the most valuable parts of a company while discarding the rest. Several board members who had known me since childhood couldn't meet my eyes. They'd been prepared for this, coached on how to vote. The unknown shareholders leaned forward eagerly, like vultures sensing a meal. "Before we vote," I said calmly, "I'd like to share some information that's relevant to this discussion." Jason's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Elena, the financial documents speak for themselves. This isn't the time for emotional appeals about your grandfather's vision." "Oh, this isn't about my grandfather's vision," I replied, connecting my tablet to the room's display system. "This is about fraud, corporate sabotage, and a conspiracy to artificially devalue Faro Design." The screen changed, now showing a very different set of data. Internal emails between Jason and several offshore entities, documenting systematic efforts to delay our projects and undermine client relationships. "What is this?" one of the board members asked, leaning forward to examine the screen. "Evidence," I said simply. "For the past 9 months, someone has been deliberately sabotaging Faro's projects, creating delays, introducing errors into designs, and interfering with client communications." I clicked to the next slide. "Our Tokyo office has provided documentation showing unauthorized changes to the Mori Tower project specifications, changes that came from Jason's computer." "This is absurd," Jason interrupted, his composure slipping. "You're manufacturing evidence to cover your own incompetence." "Ms. Chen," I said, addressing our chief financial officer, who had been silently observing until now, "could you confirm whether these financial discrepancies match the inconsistencies you've been investigating?" Lydia Chen, who had worked alongside my grandfather for 20 years, nodded firmly. "They do. I've been tracking irregularities in our reporting for months. These documents appear to explain the source." The room erupted in confused conversation. I used the moment to signal Marcus, who opened the door to admit Lucas, my brother and our company's chief technology officer, who had been working remotely for the past 6 months, supposedly overseeing our West Coast operations. In reality, he'd been conducting a forensic investigation of our internal systems, tracking the digital breadcrumbs of Jason's sabotage. "The server logs don't lie," Lucas announced, connecting his own device to the display. "We've documented over 200 instances of unauthorized access to client files, project timelines, and financial reports, all traced back to 3 IP addresses." He brought up a new screen showing the digital evidence, one at Jason's home, one at a property owned by his father, and one at an office registered to this company. Lucas projected the corporate registration of a newly formed entity, Paradigm Partners, LLC. Interesting timing, I noted. That Paradigm Partners was incorporated just 1 day after my grandfather's will was read. I turned to the unfamiliar faces at the table, and even more interesting that the primary shareholders of Paradigm Partners are sitting in this room right now, invited by Jason to vote on Faro's future. The unknown shareholders shifted uncomfortably, their predatory eagerness replaced by nervous glances. "This is a desperate attempt to maintain control," Jason snapped, standing abruptly. "These documents could be fabricated. The board has already seen the truth. The company is failing under your leadership." "Is it?" I pulled up another document, because according to our actual numbers, the ones not manipulated to create panic, our underlying business remains strong. Those lost clients, they didn't leave willingly. They were systematically misinformed and mismanaged until they had no choice but to go elsewhere. I looked directly at the board members who had known me since childhood. "You all knew my grandfather. You know the principles on which he built this company: integrity, innovation, and sustainability, not just in our designs but in how we operate. What you've witnessed over the past 9 months wasn't failure of leadership. It was a calculated attempt to steal control of Pharaoh Design. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Jason remained standing, but his confident posture had crumbled. "You can't prove any of this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually," I smiled, "I can. And there's one more thing you should know." I nodded to Lydia Chen, who distributed a document to each board member. "While you were busy manipulating reports and sabotaging projects, I was securing our core intellectual property. Pharaoh's most valuable patents, including the new carbon capture building skin that grandfather was developing before he died, have been transferred to a separate holding company controlled exclusively by a trust dedicated to maintaining Thomas Pharaoh's innovation legacy." Jason's face drained of color as he understood the implications. Without those patents, Pharaoh Design would be worth a fraction of what his buyers were expecting. "That's corporate theft," he stammered. "You can't just transfer company assets." "Actually, she can," came a new voice from the doorway. Harrison Wells, our longtime legal counsel, entered carrying a thick folder. "Thomas Pharaoh's will include specific provisions granting Elena the authority to protect core intellectual property in the event of a hostile action against the company. We've been monitoring the situation for months, waiting for the right moment." He dropped the folder on the table. "Everything was done legally and properly. The patents are protected and can only be used by Pharaoh Design as long as it remains true to its founding principles. Ladies and gentlemen," I addressed the board, "we have a choice to make today. We can allow Pharaoh Design to be dismantled by people who see it only as assets to be stripped and sold. Or we can recommit to the vision that made us industry leaders in the first place." I turned to Jason. "I move that we vote to remove Jason Pharaoh from any position within this company, effective immediately, and to begin legal proceedings to recover damages caused by his systematic sabotage." The vote wasn't even close. The aftermath was exactly as chaotic as I had expected. Security escorted Jason and Uncle Richard from the building while the board convened an emergency session to assess the full extent of the damage. The unknown shareholders, Jason's potential buyers, disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. 2 days later, I stood before our assembled employees in the main atrium of our headquarters. "The past 9 months have been challenging," I began, looking out at the faces of people who had weathered a storm they didn't fully understand until now. "Many of you noticed things weren't right, designs being changed after approval, communications getting lost, decisions that didn't make sense." Nods spread throughout the crowd. "Today, I want to be completely transparent about what happened and, more importantly, where we're going from here." Over the next hour, I explained everything: Jason's sabotage, the evidence we'd uncovered, and most importantly, our plan moving forward. Every project would be reviewed, every client personally contacted, every process examined to prevent something like this from happening again. Pharaoh Design was built on the idea that architecture should enhance life, not just contain it, I concluded. Those values aren't just marketing points. They're our foundation, and we're going to rebuild stronger than ever. The response was overwhelming, not just applause, but a palpable sense of relief and renewed purpose that spread through the room. As people filed out, many stopped to share stories of frustrations they'd experienced, irregularities they'd noticed but hadn't known how to address. Marcus approached me after the meeting. "The Tokyo team sent their congratulations and final documentation," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. "They said you'd know what to do with it." Inside was detailed evidence of exactly how Jason had interfered with the Mori Tower project, including timestamps and records of every unauthorized change, the final piece of our legal case against him. That evening, I found Lucas and grandfather's old workshop on the top floor of the building. My workshop now. He was examining the prototype of the carbon capture building skin that would revolutionize urban air quality if we could perfect it. Grandfather would have seen through Jason from day one, wouldn't he? Lucas asked as I joined him. "Probably," I agreed, running my fingers over the intricate surface of the prototype. He had a sixth sense about people's motivations. "I should have noticed sooner," Lucas said quietly. "All those system irregularities, the pattern of mistakes that weren't random at all." "We all should have," I acknowledged. But Jason was clever. He made each incident seem isolated, reasonable, just bad luck or normal business challenges. It was only when you looked at the whole picture that the pattern became clear. Lucas turned to me, his expression serious. Jason's already hired lawyers. They're claiming we engineered the whole thing to force him out. I nodded, unsurprised. Let them come. We have the evidence, and more importantly, we have the truth. And the patents, Lucas added with a slight smile. And the patents, I agreed. 6 months later, Faro Design and Engineering unveiled its first major project since the attempted takeover. A revolutionary mixed-use development in Detroit that incorporated all of our most advanced sustainable technologies, including the now perfected carbon capture exterior that actively purified surrounding air. The project garnered international attention and brought in a flood of new clients eager to work with the firm that was redefining sustainable architecture. Our stock price had more than recovered, employee morale was at an all-time high, and the legal proceedings against Jason had resulted in a settlement that included a public acknowledgement of his actions. On the 1-year anniversary of the board meeting that had changed everything, I invited the entire company to a celebration in the newly renovated main lobby, where we unveiled a simple plaque. The future must be built, not inherited. Thomas Faro. As champagne flowed and conversation hummed around me, I found myself standing before the architectural model of our Detroit project, admiring the miniature version of what we had accomplished. He would be proud, said a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Lydia Chen, who had worked alongside my grandfather for so many years. Not just of saving the company, she continued, but of how you did it. Thomas always said the true test of a design isn't just whether it stands, but whether it improves the lives of those who interact with it. I smiled, thinking of all we had overcome and all that still lay ahead. We're not done yet, I told her. There's still so much to build. And that, ultimately, was the greatest victory. Jason had tried to reduce my grandfather's legacy to assets on a balance sheet, pieces to be sold to the highest bidder. Instead, he had only succeeded in proving why the Faro name would endure long after his schemes were forgotten. Because while Jason had been focused on what he could tear down, we had never stopped imagining what we could build up.